Hey, good morning. So I'm here to talk you through what we did week of 10 in seminar. The schedule here says that they were to read and highlight pages 51 through 55. So that's what we were going to talk through. 51 through 55 has this lesson, Declension of Flūmen, and then it's just a review of the concepts of third declension. So that's really what we did. So we started with this vocabulary, which I had written on the board. I had not done any writing on it other than simply putting the nominative singular and the genitive singular on the board. So we made our observations, and they told me things like a lot of the words end in N, like Flūmen, Agmen, Nomen. And so let's see, what were some other observations that they made? One student made this observation, and I was really kind of hoping somebody would, and that was the fact that Agmen, even though it sounds the same, the spelling changes from EN to IN in the stem. So that was an important, and that happened here, and up here with Flūmen. So that's really good because I've noticed in the past that is a common misspelling. Whenever they are declining their nouns, they will forget to change it to the IN and look at this stem in order to decline. Anyway, so after we kind of made some observations, somebody had mentioned that these guys must be neuter automatically. And anyway, so we jumped into, we start with declension, actually. If we're going to really analyze this vocabulary, the first thing we want to identify is the declension. So sure enough, everything is IS. So that tells me that we are in third declension. So we marked that up. And then, of course, once you have the third declension ending, then you know your stem. So we underlined those. After that, in order to get into gender, we need to know what the words mean. So I had them see if they could remember from their preview what any of these words meant, or if they could guess any of them based on things that they already knew. Like, I think some people knew this one already, and one person who didn't actually know that vulnus meant wound made a comment about how, well, doesn't that mean vulnerable? Is that where vulnerable comes from? And I'm like, well, that's what wound is. So we talked a little bit about our derivatives here. And then, because none of these officially name a person, then we go to our gender rules of either Sachs, error, or Lancet. Now, I have to be, honest here. This particular word bothers me a little bit because a column of soldiers and an army on the march technically is referring to men, in my opinion. I don't know why this one's not masculine, and why is hostess, which means enemy, masculine, but army on the march and column of soldiers is not. I don't know, but I don't let these things bother me. I just know the book says it's neuter, and I guess we're just going to go with it and memorize it. Anyway, so moving on. So we identified that, and so we went and we looked at all of these. These are neuter because of the Lancet rule. These are neuter because the vocabulary tells you so. So we got our gender out of the way. Then we walked through the I-stem rules that we learned last week, Rule 60 and 61, based on the number of syllables or the double consonant end of the stem. And we realized that none of these follow that rule. So at first assumption, they wanted to say that these would follow the lake's declension, which would be this one here. But after further observation in our little blue book, we discovered that we actually have a whole different declension for the neuter nouns. And so we opened up their little blue books and we took a look at this declension versus the Lake's convention to identify what the differences are. Of course, we still have our various. Somebody noticed that the accusative singular is not like Lake's. Instead, it seems to follow the nominative singular. And then, of course, because we have a neuter declension, we have the A in nominative plural and accusative plural, which that also showed up in second declension. So anyway, we talked through the differences of this column versus the lakes column, and that will help us to decline our nouns. So we identified these as Rule 64, not Rule 57, which is the lakes declension. Anyway, and that was kind of it. There's not really any new stuff in this particular section, so we decided to practice our exercises. One of the students had asked if he could get some help going from English to Latin because those are harder. So we did definitely do that. First of all, we did a couple of problems from exercise 54. They pulled out their exercise notebooks and we worked through those together. We also did the first problem from exercise 56. The process, I know I've talked through this before, but the process I generally use is we always identify our verb first and words associated with the verb, which would be adverbs. So in this case, we did this. This tells me that it is singular. So like he is. We reviewed our OST, mustis, unt endings here. And then after we identified these two words, we have all of these other words left. And I kind of like to have them do the ones that are not the nouns first, because we have prepositions now, and those will sometimes give us clues about the endings that we have with our nouns. So we actually started with that. I said, do we see anything in this list that is not a noun? So of course, we had somebody identify propter, and so I always ask the question when you see a preposition, what case does it take? Is it accusative or ablative? So we write that here. If this one's accusative, we know propter always takes the accusative. Then we notice right here, and I notice I circled this one in blue, kind of like the preposition. This one is the accusative plural. It's accusative because it follows propter, not because it's a direct object. So it's still an OP, even though it's accusative plural. Anyway, so this OP follows that one, and we found another preposition here. But N takes the ablative. So notice we have our ablative singular ending over here. Anyway, the only other noun we had in here was miles. We had a little bit of an argument going on as to whether or not this was nominative singular or nominative plural. And we found out that after some careful consideration and some arguing amongst a number of the boys, that this is not the nominative plural because there is no macron here. So this is where those macrons really come in handy. If you have a macron here, this would be nominative plural, but because there is not one, it would be nominative singular. And of course, it makes sense that the subject would be singular because our verb is also singular. So we review the rule that the subject and the verb has to agree. Anyway, after that, we got all this stuff labeled. We took a stab at translating. And once we have it here, I pointed out sometimes those prepositional phrases can bounce around a little bit. I think the answer key actually has this one as, on account of wounds, the soldier is not in the column of soldiers. So I know one question came up is, why do we have of soldiers here? I don't see that word in the sentence. And I'm like, don't forget that that's what agmen means, is column of soldiers. It's all together. It's one Latin word. Anyway, we did talk a little bit because somebody mentioned that they wanted to put his here. And I'm like, well, they don't actually have a Latin pronoun in the sentence, so we're not going to do it. But in English, it probably would sound better if you said on account of his wounds. But anyway, that's why it's in parentheses. They do that sometimes in the answer key. Anyway, then we got to exercise 57, which has going from English to Latin. Now, I don't stress this a whole lot because they are going to be getting this next year and the year after. But for those who want to go for it, most of my class is doing really well with the Latin, and so they are definitely trying these. Anyway, so we started first by basically doing what we do in essentials to a certain degree, our question confirmation. We look for our subject and our verb first, so we found that. And here, in noticing that we have that inverted sentence pattern where the subject is following the verb. This word there, we discovered in our Latin book a few weeks ago that it's called an expletive, and it is not the subject of the sentence, all right? If we have est, that's our singular version, and sunt is our plural version, and that's the translations for it. Anyway, once we walked through this, we, let's see, we started with many times when you have a there are, when you have the expletive, you will see this verb out in front. So we went ahead and got that one down. And then kind of, I guess the process that we did with these was we identified the Latin word like corpus, corporis. And I'm like, well, what's the stem of it? And we would write the stem down, corpora, first. And then I would ask them, what ending do we need? This is plural, so we would need nominative, plural, and then we would find it in the chart because they don't necessarily have this chart quite memorized yet. Anyway, so it's all about, or the process that I would walk them through would be first find the stem, then discover your ending based on how it is used in the sentence. So I think the key to these is getting it written down and getting the words labeled before you try translating it. Anyway, and then last but not least, we played bananagrams, and that's just like Scrabble tiles, and I divided them up into 3 groups and gave each group a pile of these bananagrams, and they just sat and basically created like a Scrabble board of Latin vocabulary. Now, this was the first time we had played this particular game in class, so I let them have one purple book in each group. But moving forward in the future, as we go through this, I will do it where they're not allowed to have a Latin book with them. It's got to come out of their heads. Anyway, so I will have some pictures of that. You can take a look. Have a great day.